How does a $500 hobbyist drone, flown somewhere in the Middle East, end up dictating the price of diesel in Delhi?
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
Right. And what does that have to do with a constitutional crisis brewing in a state assembly? Well, welcome to today's deep dive.
We are really getting into it today.
We absolutely are. Look, if you are preparing for the UPSC, you're generally taught to, put polity, economics, internal security, and international relations into their own separate manageable boxes.
Which, makes sense for studying, but reality doesn't work like that.
Exactly. Today, we are obliterating those boxes. We've curated a massive stack of sources specifically with you in mind, and our mission is to synthesize all these seemingly disconnected events into clear, actionable administrative knowledge.
And, the overarching theme in the material today is really about fragility versus force.
Oh, I like that framing.
Yeah, we're basically analyzing the friction that occurs when established systems, whether that's a state power grid, a rural welfare net, or even global maritime law, are suddenly overwhelmed by new pressures.
Right.
And as we will see, a breakdown in one of these arenas almost immediately forces a crisis in another.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with the ultimate operating system of the Constitution.
That's always the foundation.
Right. So we are seeing a live stress test of constitutional mechanics playing out in Tamil Nadu right now, specifically regarding the role of the governor in government formation.
Yeah, there's just profound political uncertainty there at the moment.
Definitely. So the TVK party, which is led by C. Joseph Vijay, currently sits at 116 seats. They have the unconditional support of the left parties, but they are still 2 seats short of the 118 required for a simple majority in the 234-member House.
And, this numerical gap has triggered a really complex legal standoff. The TVK has approached the governor to stake their claim to form the government.
Right, which makes sense as the largest bloc.
Yes, but simultaneously, a TVK member has filed a petition in the Supreme Court. They're arguing that the governor is duty-bound to invite the single largest party to form the government first, and then allow them to prove their majority on the floor of the House.
So prove it on the floor, not in the governor's office.
Exactly. But the political environment is just incredibly volatile. You have the AMMK party chief alleging that the TVK submitted a forged letter of support from their lone MLA.
Wow, okay. And just to be absolutely clear to everyone listening, we are looking at these claims from the TVK, the AMMK, and the left parties purely as administrative analysts.
Right, we are just looking at the mechanics here.
Yeah, we are impartially reporting the claims without taking any political side or validating any specific narrative. We just want to look at the core tension, which really seems to be about timing and proof.
That's the crux of it, yeah. The governor reportedly wants to see a verified list of 118 MLAs before issuing any invitation.
But wait, if we think of the governor as a referee in a tied match, is demanding a list of 118 MLAs up front, like asking to see the winning goal before starting the clock?
That is a fascinating way to put it.
I mean, it forces them to secure those numbers in the shadows, right? Which seems like exactly the kind of environment that triggers unconstitutional horse trading. Doesn't demanding proof before the floor test actually undermine the purpose of the floor test itself?
This raises an important question. It's really one regarding the fundamental sequence of democratic formation. You're hitting on the exact argument presented in that Supreme Court petition.
Okay, so there's precedent for this.
Right. Generally speaking, the established constitutional convention is that the floor of the House is the only valid testing ground for a majority.
Not a backroom list.
Exactly. Inverting that sequence, like demanding a watertight list beforehand, theoretically shifts the power of government formation away from the elected assembly and directly to the governor's office.
Which is a massive shift in power dynamics.
It is. However, we also have to examine the mechanism of the governor's discretionary powers. These powers exist specifically as a safeguard against the subversion of the democratic process.
Oh, so they aren't just ceremonial.
Not at all. If a governor receives credible intelligence or even public allegations, like we see with the AMNK's forged letter claim that numbers are being manufactured through coercion or fraud, they can't simply operate as a rubber stamp.
Right, they have a duty to intervene.
Yeah, they have to weigh procedural convention against the immediate threat of the constitutional machinery breaking down.
Man, which is an incredible administrative tightrope to walk. Especially with, left parties warning that prolonged uncertainty could lead to president's rule.
It's a high-stakes balancing act for sure.
Definitely. But if we consider the Constitution as a framework designed to provide democratic stability, we also need to look at how the state manages its foundational duty to socio-economic stability.
Oh, absolutely. Governance isn't just about who sits in the assembly.
Exactly. Because the data crossing our desks on rural welfare suggests a massive structural failure is currently unfolding. We are looking at a severe contraction in the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, MGNREGS, for the 2025-26 period.
And the contraction is stark, particularly because it totally contradicts the demographic trends we are seeing.
What do the numbers look like?
According to the sources, there was actually a 3.2% rise in registered households seeking work.
So demand went up?
Demand went up, yes.
Yes.
However, the system failed to absorb them. 44 lakh fewer households actually found work compared to the previous period.
Wait, 44 lakh fewer? That's huge.
It is. The total person days of employment generated dropped by 21.5%, and this resulted in an average income loss of 12,221 rupees per household.
Now, I know the government is currently transitioning away from MGNREGS, right? They're moving toward the new Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Act.
Yes, that is the official transition plan.
And they have allocated 30,000 crore rupees for this shift. But, 1,221 rupees might not sound like a systemic shock to someone living in an urban center, but in a rural agricultural household, that is literally the difference between sustenance and total economic freefall.
Oh, completely. It wipes out their entire buffer.
Right. So what does this all mean? When you look at the NCRB crime data for 2024, and again, just noting impartially that the Congress Party recently highlighted this to critique the government's law and order record, there are massive spikes across the board.
The numbers are definitely alarming.
Yeah, crimes against women rose by 42.6%. Crimes against Adivasis went up by 46.7%. And cybercrime, it surged by an astronomical 1689%.
It's just staggering.
So if the economic safety net of MGNREGS is shrinking, does the data suggest a direct correlation to the spikes we're seeing in the NCRB crime and suicide statistics? Are we looking at a direct pipeline here?
We are essentially looking at the mechanics of a power vacuum. When formal state protections weaken, social friction doesn't just increase, it reorganizes.
Reorganizes how?
Let's break down that cybercrime statistic. A 1689% spike is not random at all. When a rural daily wage earner or a farmer loses their primary income safety net, but they still have access to cheap smartphones and 5G data, you see a direct migration from agricultural unemployment to localized cyber fraud hubs.
Oh, wow. So they turn to the phone to make up the lost income.
Exactly. They aren't just engaging in random theft. They are replacing a lost, guaranteed state wage with a digital hustle. The economic vulnerability directly fuels the criminal enterprise.
That makes the shift from physical to digital crime incredibly logical, honestly.
It's survival economics.
But the sources also highlight physical structural vacuums, particularly with the rise of informal COP or Jatiya Panchayats in Rajasthan.
Yes, that case study was deeply concerning.
There is a really disturbing case here about a woman named Rinku. Her family was subjected to a social boycott by one of these informal caste councils.
Just completely cut off from the community.
Literally. They were forced to abandon their ancestral village where they owned land and flee 20 kilometers away to Pali. Her father was reduced to working as a factory laborer. But wait, aren't caste panchayats technically illegal?
They absolutely are. They have no constitutional authority.
Right. So if they operate entirely outside the Constitution, why is the local administration seemingly powerless to stop them from exiling a family? Is it just like a lack of police presence?
It is rarely just a lack of police presence. It is the insidious nature of structural intimidation. The formal constitutional bodies, the elected gram panchayats, they derive their power from statutory law.
Okay.
But when the state fails to provide rapid economic or physical security, parallel extra-legal bodies derive their power from deep-rooted social capital and economic monopolization.
So they control the actual resources on the ground.
Exactly. Even if the local administration steps in and makes arrests, in Rinku's case, the social boycott remains. You cannot legislate who the local grocer sells to or, who hires whom for day labor.
Wow, so the law can't force people to interact with you.
Right. When the formal economic floor drops out, marginalized communities become entirely dependent on local power brokers for survival. The caste panchayat essentially starves you out of the economy.
That is brutal.
It's a dual failure.
Yeah.
It's the state's inability to enforce the law compounded by its failure to provide independent economic security.
That is a chilling administrative reality. When the state retreats economically, these regressive local forces just step right in.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Right. But what happens when the state tries to aggressively assert its power on the borders? Because the sources show a massive hardening of India's strategic posture right now, particularly on the eastern front with Bangladesh.
Yes, the diplomatic friction there has clearly reached a tipping point.
Yeah, diplomatic notes indicate New Delhi has sent over 1,000 messages to Dhaka regarding the repatriation of illegal immigrants, with seemingly no actionable response.
And that lack of response is manifesting as a profound shift in border management. Union Home Minister Amit Shah recently stated that the ruling party's election victory in West Bengal is being utilized to plug a major national security vulnerability.
Okay, so a hardline approach.
Very much so. The stated administrative objective is to transform that 2,216-kilometer border with Bangladesh into an impenetrable fortress. They are specifically targeting infiltration and organized cattle smuggling networks.
I am struggling to reconcile this posture with our next source, though.
How so?
Well, we are locking down Bengal to relentlessly assert our sovereignty and security, right? But simultaneously, the government is pushing the 92,000 crore Great Nicobar project.
Right, the massive transshipment port and airport.
Yeah, which is meant to project maritime power. Yet the Calcutta High Court just overruled the center's preliminary objections to a petition challenging the project.
Yes, brought by a former IAS officer.
Exactly. She's alleging the government is violating its own Forest Rights Act and ignoring buffer zones for national parks. So we're trying to build an impenetrable fortress in Bengal for security, while simultaneously building a 92,000 crore mega project in Nicobar. Is there an inherent contradiction here between our massive strategic ambitions and maintaining our own environmental and tribal laws?
What's fascinating here is the absolute administrative paradox of a developing superpower. It is not necessarily about sacrificing one for the other. It is just a brutal collision of mandates.
What do you mean by collision of mandates?
Well, on one hand, securing porous borders and establishing deepwater ports in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is an existential requirement. You have to protect global trade routes from adversarial navies. It is macro security.
Okay, that makes sense.
On the other hand, the Constitution does not allow the executive to simply bulldoze over statutory rights, especially those protecting vulnerable tribal communities.
So the law applies equally to the government.
Yes. The center actually tried to argue the petitioner lacked locus standis, basically saying she didn't have the right to bring the case because she lives in Hyderabad, not Nicobar.
Oh, interesting. Did that work?
No, the High Court ruled she is espousing the cause of a vulnerable community. This is the exact mechanism of judicial review acting as a critical pressure valve. It forces the state to prove that its macro security ambitions do not unlawfully erase micro-level statutory rights.
And that strategic ambition is evolving at an unprecedented pace, especially when we look at how India is choosing to defend those borders militarily.
The doctrinal shift is massive.
Yeah, which brings us to the new military doctrine and Operation Sindoor. The sources describe this 88-hour, high-intensity military response triggered by the Pahalgam carnage.
A very rapid escalation.
Yeah. India initially struck 9 terror targets. And then when Pakistan attempted to retaliate against Indian high-value assets, the Indian Air Force hit 11 Pakistani military bases in near real time.
This is an overwhelming response.
We are looking at a categorical shift from reactive restraint to treating cross-border terror explicitly as an act of war.
It is the definitive erasure of the old operational red lines. But to really understand the administrative importance of Operation Sindoor, you have to look past the political will.
Okay, what should we be looking at?
You have to examine the underlying mechanism that actually made it viable.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources highlight the successful integration of the TARA weapon system.
Yes, a crucial technological leap.
For those who don't know, TARA stands for Tactical Advanced Range Augmentation. It is an indigenous system developed by DRDO and the IAF that essentially bolts onto cheap, conventional, unguided warheads and turns them into precision-guided glide weapons. They just successfully tested it in Odisha.
It's a game changer for the Air Force.
It sounds like India is upgrading from waiting for the storm to pass to using a highly precise scalpel like the TARA system to neutralize threats before they even arrive.
That scalpel analogy is crucial because it perfectly illustrates the concept of escalation control under a nuclear overhang.
Escalation control.
Yeah, this is a mechanism every policy student must internalize. If two nuclear-armed neighbors go to war, The risk of total annihilation is constant.
Right, the stakes couldn't be higher.
So escalation control means calibrating your violence so precisely that you punish the adversary heavily, but you do not cross the threshold that triggers a nuclear response.
Ah, I see. So you hit them hard, but not hard enough to end the world.
Exactly. Systems like TARA allow the Air Force to conduct standoff strikes hitting targets with extreme precision without necessarily sending manned jets deep into heavily defended sovereign airspace.
Which minimizes the risk of a pilot getting captured, which would escalate things further.
Precisely. And combined with a robust, networked air defense system like the S-400 to deny the adversary any counterattack capability, India essentially forced a ceasefire on its own terms.
That is incredible civil-military synergy.
It is. Furthermore, relying on indigenous tech like TARA proves that Manirprada's self-reliance in defense is not just a manufacturing slogan, it is an operational prerequisite.
Right, because if you run out of missiles during a conflict, you're done.
Exactly. You cannot enforce escalation control if you are waiting for foreign countries to ship you replacement parts or weapons.
That makes absolute sense. Localized technology is dictating massive geopolitical outcomes. But, the reverse is also true.
Well, so?
Global geopolitics and asymmetrical technology are destroying our localized everyday economics. Let's talk about the petrol pump.
Ah, yes. The fuel pricing crisis.
Right now, Indian oil marketing companies, the OMCs, are hemorrhaging money. They're losing around 30,000 crore rupees every single month.
That's $1 billion bleed, essentially.
Yeah. And that is happening despite the government cutting excise duties on retail fuel and absorbing a 14,000 crore revenue hit themselves. The OMCs are just eating the massive cost of soaring crude oil due to the crisis in West Asia, specifically the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. We really cannot overstate the structural importance of this maritime choke point. It handles roughly a fifth of all global energy trade.
It's a massive bottleneck.
It is.
And the U.S. attempted to secure the Strait with Project Freedom, and it completely failed. And the mechanism of that failure is what really blew my mind in these sources.
It completely rewrites naval warfare.
We are seeing a fundamental inversion of military economics here. A $20,000 off-the-shelf drone swarm launched by non-state actors is effectively neutralizing $2 billion U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers.
It's asymmetrical warfare at its peak.
You don't need a massive navy to block a strait anymore. You just need a warehouse of cheap drones. And because traditional battleship escorts cannot guarantee the safety of commercial vessels against drone swarms, the insurance premiums for merchant ships just skyrocket.
And who pays for that insurance?
Exactly. That cost is passed directly onto the crude oil reaching Indian shores. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you begin to see the terrifying fragility of the global supply chain. A technological asymmetry in the Middle East directly dictates India's fiscal deficit.
It's totally connected. And compound that with the trade turbulence we are seeing from the U.S. right now.
The tariff issues.
Yeah, the U.S. Court of International Trade recently canceled the 10% reciprocal tariff that had been hitting Indian exporters. They ruled it was unauthorized by law when President Trump enacted it.
Which sounds like a win for India.
While that sounds like a legal victory, the sources note it doesn't offer immediate relief. The U.S. will likely appeal the decision, leaving bilateral trade agreements in total limbo. So are we, as everyday consumers, essentially subsidizing global drone warfare and international trade disputes at the petrol pump because OMCs are absorbing these massive losses?
Indirectly, yes, you are. The 30,000 crore monthly loss absorbed by OMCs has to be accounted for somewhere in the macroeconomy.
It all trickles down.
It proves unequivocally that energy security and national security are indistinguishable today. You cannot decouple your domestic economy from global asymmetrical conflicts as long as you rely on imported fossil fuels.
Which naturally brings us to the obvious pivot: renewable energy. If reliance on global fossil fuels is bleeding the economy, the obvious answer is renewable energy.
It's the only sustainable way out.
But as our sources show, particularly looking at Kerala's current summer power crisis, the grid isn't ready. Our infrastructure is structurally incapable of handling that transition right now.
The grid is under immense stress.
We have soaring demand from air conditioners, electric vehicles, and induction cooktops. And the state actually has a massive number of prosumers, consumers who are generating their own clean solar power during the day, yet the grid is constantly on the verge of buckling.
This is a textbook example of system constraints.
Yeah.
Specifically, it's a phenomenon grid managers refer to as the duck curve.
The duck curve.
Yeah. The fundamental issue with solar energy is that generation peaks at noon, right when domestic demand is actually quite low. Most people are at work.
Right.
But when the sun goes down and everyone returns home to plug in their EVs and turn on their ACs, the solar generation drops to zero while demand spikes violently.
So we have people generating their own clean power during the day, but the state still has to buy expensive power at night. It's like having a massive rainwater harvesting tank with a giant hole in the bottom.
That's a great analogy. And it's an issue of frequency and stability, too.
Because if the grid is flooded with solar power at noon that no one is using, it can literally overload and trip the system, right? The green energy effectively becomes a hazard.
Precisely. Renewable energy is intermittent. Without massive, localized storage solutions, excess green energy actually becomes a severe nuisance to load dispatchers rather than a solution to the fuel crisis.
Wow, a nuisance.
Yeah, the grid requires generation and consumption to be perfectly balanced at all times to maintain frequency. To solve the duck curve, Kerala, and really the rest of India, urgently requires massive storage buffers.
What kind of buffer?
This means rapidly scaling up pump storage power plants, or PSPs, and battery energy storage systems, known as BESS.
Like the 125 megawatt facility that is currently coming up in Kasaragod.
Exactly like that.
Without that massive battery architecture, generating clean power doesn't actually solve the geopolitical fuel crisis. It just creates a localized infrastructure crisis.
That is the administrative reality. The technology to generate renewable energy has vastly outpaced the infrastructure's ability to store and distribute it safely. Until that gap is closed, we remain tethered to the vulnerabilities of the Strait of Hormuz.
Man, it is all so deeply mechanically connected. Just think about the administrative journey we just mapped out today.
It's a lot of ground covered.
We started with the foundational sequence of the Constitution being tested by the governor and political factions in Tamil Nadu. Then we examined how the structural contraction of rural welfare schemes, like MGNREGS, creates economic vacuums that force vulnerable citizens into cybercrime or leave them exposed to extra-legal caste panchayats.
Right, the local failures.
And from there, we navigated the paradox of a state aggressively hardening its Bengal border while facing judicial pushback over environmental and tribal rights for a mega project in Nicobar. We explored the doctrinal shift of Operation Sindoor, where indigenous tech like Tara enables precise escalation control.
Connecting the military to the domestic.
And finally, we saw how asymmetrical drone warfare in global choke points bleeds our domestic economy, pushing us toward a renewable energy grid that is currently fighting its own systemic constraints.
It really highlights why compartmentalized thinking fails in modern governance. You cannot draft an economic welfare policy without understanding digital crime pipeline.
No, you can't.
And you cannot understand domestic energy pricing without grasping the economics of asymmetrical naval warfare.
Which leaves us with one final, very provocative thought to end on today. We talked extensively about how a $20,000 drone swarm in the Strait of Hormuz can paralyze global shipping and cost Indian oil companies 30,000 crore rupees a month.
A massive financial hit.
But what happens when those exact same asymmetrical technologies, those cheap, off-the-shelf drones, begin to be utilized not just in global conflicts, but by non-state actors or insurgents operating within the very domestic borders we are trying to make impenetrable? As future policymakers, how do you regulate a threat you can just buy off the internet with a credit card?
That is the real security challenge of the next decade.
Something to carefully consider as you review your notes. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep connecting the dots and keep questioning the world around you.